In 1947, Truman's containment doctrine was America's first articulation that it would be the policy of the United States government to attempt to contain Soviet expansion, particularly with regard to Eastern Europe. From the American perspective, the Soviet Union was aggressively on the move, but Washington, as it is apt to do, disregarded the Soviets' bloody history. Franklin Roosevelt's great hope was to see a constructive and peaceful relationship between the two superpowers. But Harry Truman was no FDR and readily took advice from hardliners in his administration who employed misleading and alarmist rhetoric about the nature of the communist threat.
Later, when he was flying over the South Vietnamese countryside, looking down upon these incredibly dense rainforests, just terribly rugged terrain, he's looking down wondering to himself, how are we going to fight in this? As a senator and as a presidential candidate, he said over and over that the Vietnam War, on one level, it was an avoidable war if American foreign policymakers had simply paid attention to competent Asian scholars who pointed out that this was not really a matter of the international communist conspiracy. It was more of a local uprising which had its roots in Western colonialism, a reaction to that.
Well, Terry was 4 years old. She was playing beneath our window on a warm summer day. We had the windows open, and Ellen and I found ourselves listening to the conversation she had with the little 4-year-old boy from next door. He said that his favorite people were his dad, his mother, and his baby sister. Terry said, well, they're not my favorite people. My three are God, Jesus, and Adlai Stevenson. I told that story to Adlai Stevenson, and he said, well, George, that's a marvelous story, but I don't think even you and I together could sell that version of the Holy Trinity.
They brought him to New York and gave him a whole new life and then put him back in, and he won with an Agnew. And it was interesting. You had some white folks loved Agnew, man. It was Agnew was talking to their little long-haired, reefer-smoking white children. Now, I was one of the few people.
And when it turned out to be what Eagleton called melancholia, I thought, no, there's no such disease anymore. It has lots of other names, and they're all pretty ugly.
At another point, he was asked whether or not he was still on any kind of medication. And he said, yes, but don't worry because the prescription is in my wife's name.
Each time he was asked about, well, did you go into treatment? He would say yes, and they would say, is that all? And he said, that's all. Well, and then there would be something else, and he said, oh, yes, so it was a problem of disclosure.
McGovern's standing in the eyes of a lot of people was somebody who had bungled and who had waffled. And that was a serious blow to his candidacy.
The rules of the convention at that time required that a vice presidential nominee actually have the signatures of, I believe, 150 delegates from a certain number of states.
We had no Secret Service. We had no ability to call on the FBI or any of those agencies to vet any of the candidates.
I got the word back from Gary Hart that the choice was Mayor Kevin White of Boston. I had my floor coordinators circulate a sufficient number of petitions under Kevin White's name to ensure that by 4 o'clock we would meet the filing deadline. And not having slept in 3 days, I then went to sleep.
I often wonder why it was that the McGovern people didn't know that Kevin White was unacceptable to the Kennedy folks.
They even started.
Yes,
yeah.
They should have known that.
Yeah. At 10 minutes of 4, Gary Hart woke me up and said, are the petitions ready? And I said, they are. And he said, well, there's a slight complication. The nominee is going to be Thomas Eagleton. And I said, Gary, the petitions are due in 10 minutes. I can't get 150 signatures in 10 minutes. And Gary said, do what you have to do. So creatively, I took a bottle of whited out Kevin White's name, typed in Thomas Eagleton's name, and filed the petitions at 4 o'clock. So what happened between the time I went to sleep at 1 o'clock and 10 minutes at 4, I don't know.
On another level, debate fundamentally changed George McGovern's life, as it did an opponent of his, when he met his wife-to-be, Eleanor Stegeberg of Woonsocket, South Dakota.
She was smart and compassionate and knowledgeable and her own person totally. I mean, not for nothing did she defeat George in a debating contest, which is how they met. and gentle and compassionate, you know, a really good person.
This defeat by Eleanor and her twin sister Isla, first time I had met these remarkably intelligent and beautiful young women, did make me think seriously about a previous bias I had, and that was that men would always be better debaters than women. Not so.
I think anybody that was worth listening to in 1970 were the outsiders, the poets, the songwriters, the high school history teachers that wore turtlenecks to school and were honest with you. And McGovern fell right in that line.
If you grow up out in the Great Plains, you have to live with the philosophy that next year is going to be better. You can't survive any other way. And maybe that's the way it is with life. People laugh about that relationship between a person and the land. They say it's an old-fashioned idea. It's really not.
He was giving us an opportunity to live out the American dream of having a voice in our government. What a great gift to give someone. I mean, he gave us hope.
When the news first broke about that, the White House said they didn't really know much about this rather bizarre incident. And of course, as we do know, the White House knew almost everything about this rather bizarre incident.
You had the committee to re-elect, the infamous creep, collecting and laundering hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
And the reason was that some of it would obviously be suspect special interest money designed to buy favors at the White House. The fact that he wouldn't debate, he didn't really get hammered for that by the press. The Watergate break-in, he never really got hit by that until after the election. The laundering of money in Latin America. The fact that he dragged out the war in Vietnam needlessly for 4 long years. He never really got his comeuppance on any of those things from the press. I tried as best I could, but I was kind of a voice crying in the wilderness.
Press has pretty much failed us, I think. Failed the public and failed America.
This gap between the very rich on one hand and the very poor on the other cannot be allowed to continue. It's going to produce revolutions, it's going to produce instability, it's going to produce disease, it's going to encourage the spread of AIDS and other maladies. We need to be about the business of narrowing the gap between those who have, in some cases, too much and those who have too little.
From secrecy and deception in high places, come home, America.
From a conflict in Indochina, which maims our ideals as well as our soldiers, come home, America.
From military spending so wasteful it weakens our nation, come home, America.
From the waste of idle hands to the joy of useful labor.
From the prejudice of race and sex.
Come home to the affirmation that we have a dream.
And let us be joyful in the homecoming.
This is the time.